and we are at a panel, and we're about to start. I pressed the button a little early for going live, so I'm going to flip the screen around though so you can see the stage. It's so funny how they're just how does this all this like I had one off the notes last night checking. It's good.
You know that old house at the end of the road, the one that nobody ever dares go. They all have good reason to shine, steer clear of that spooky abode and its dark atmosphere. For waiting inside all manner of frights, especially on those cold, dark, and stormy nights. It lays in ruin, run down and overgrown. But to all of us ghosts, it's our haunted sweet home. Welcome to our haunted house. Step right in, don't know what you're about. The ghosts are dying to give you a tour down every dank and dark corridor. The shadows whisper and the floorboards creak,
and every cobweb's hung with care.
We've done our best to keep it cold and bleak, so you'll be primed for every scare. Welcome to our haunted house. Around each bend, something waits to pop out. 1,000 horrors are lurking within to frighten you right out of your skin. A phantom's hiding neath that old bedspread.
A severed hand creeps across the floor.
Our basement's loaded with the living dead, and we've got specters by the score. Oh, welcome to our haunted house. Ghosts can be real, but now you're having your doubts. Just spend the night here, we'll prove it to you. By making all your nightmares come true. It's bound to scare you when you see a ghostly review. We double dare ya. Don't be daunted, brave our haunted house.
Welcome to Midsummer Scream. Journey with us now into Halloween's past, exploring early traditions such as trick-or-treating and jack-o'-lanterns, to the modern business of high-tech haunted attractions and theme park events. Please welcome to the stage award-winning authors and Halloween historians, Lisa Morton and Ted Dougherty.
Hello, hi everybody. Welcome. Wow, here we are back at Midsummer Scream in Long Beach. How exciting, yeah! You know, Lisa, we've been talking about doing this presentation since early 2020, so I'm happy to finally being able to do this with you.
Sure, yeah, me too.
Yeah, so, well, we're going to talk about some fun Halloween things, and of course, this is just going to be an overview because, well, of course, whole books have been written about this stuff, so this is going to be a fun overview to kind of help us celebrate Halloween here in July at Midsummer Scream. And so the way this is going to work is Lisa's going to talk about some stuff, I'm going to talk about some stuff, and hopefully we fit it all in. And so we've got a ton of information to share with you. So I'm going to just pass things over to Lisa and get started. Strap yourselves in. Are you all ready? All right, here we go.
All right, hey, happy Llamas to anyone here who celebrates that, but for the rest of us, happy 3 months to go. So if I were to ask any of you, what was your favorite part of Halloween when you were a kid? I'm betting that the number one response is going to be, trick or treat, right? Who didn't love getting dressed up on that one special night and going out to get candy? For a lot of us, it was about even more than just that one night, though, because we had to think about what we wanted to be. We had to get our costumes together, get everything set up with our friends and our family. I mean, is it really any wonder that Halloween eventually became a season? Trick or treat might be one of the most beloved of Halloween institutions, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. As a Halloween historian, I hear some crazy speculation about trick or treat. One of the most common ones is that it goes all the way back to the ancient Celts and all the way to their Samhain celebrations that claims that they dressed in bear skins, went from house to house demanding human sacrifices as the treat. And yeah, that's pretty much totally wrong. I also hear a lot that we dress in scary masks to frighten away evil spirits. Okay, first off, that doesn't explain Disney princesses. While it sounds great and makes a terrific story on Halloween night, I'm sorry to report that this also is not true. So let's set the record straight by doing a little myth busting. First off, you might hear that trick or treat derives from a British tradition called souling. Now, this was something that was done on All Souls Day, which is November 2nd. All Souls Day is when people in the Catholic faith offer prayers for the souls of their loved ones who are trapped in purgatory. Now, somewhere down through history, and we know it was by the 14th century, beggars came up with the idea of saying prayers for homeowners' loved ones in exchange for food. Now, when kids saw the nifty sweets that these beggars were getting, they followed by painting their faces with soot and dressing in rags and going from house to house begging for those little treats. Housewives created special little soul cakes for the beggars and for the kids. I mean, it sounds a little bit like trick or treat, right? But there is another British tradition that gets linked to trick or treat as well, which is Guy Fawkes Day or Bonfire Night. Now, this is a secular festival celebrated in Great Britain on November 5th in commemoration of a failed attempt in 1605 to blow up Parliament. Guy Fawkes was the dude caught in the basement with 36 barrels of gunpowder, unlucky him. So kids would go around begging for money and wood to build bonfires and effigies of Guy Fawkes to burn. Now the kids might dress up, smearing their faces with ash, and would recite a little ritualized phrase asking a penny for the guy. Now again, it sounds a little bit like trick or treat, doesn't it? But here's the thing, no, sorry, but there is no direct link between either souling or begging a penny for the guy and trick or treat. Now, when the Irish and Scottish came to America in the 1840s, they didn't bring a costuming tradition with them for Halloween. Instead, their Halloweens were celebrated with parties and telling ghost stories and playing fortune-telling games. Just like in the classic 1785 poem by Robert Burns, Halloween. Oh, and there was something else that the Irish in particular loved to do on Halloween. They played pranks. The pranks in Ireland might consist of carving a scary face into a turnip and putting that out where an unwary traveler on Halloween might stumble across it and get a fright, believing it to be the legendary Jack the Trickster, who had outwitted the devil 3 times, but as a result was condemned to wander the earth, lighting his way with a carved-out gourd. When the Irish arrived in America, they discovered the native pumpkin, which worked way better for carving those creepy faces than turnips. that all started to catch on in America, especially the prank playing part, which young boys all over the New World soon realized was just way too much fun. Now, at first the pranks were pretty innocent, like disassembling a gate and reassembling it somewhere else, maybe on top of the barn roof. This was so common, in fact, that in a lot of places, Halloween was called gate night. Or the kids might move all kinds of stuff to the middle of Main Street in town, like you see in this photo of a small Iowa town the morning after Halloween 1910. You can see bathtubs, carriages, all kinds of crazy things there. But what started out as pretty innocent hijinks changed as we moved into the 20th century, as America became more urbanized. Halloween pranking moved out of the boonies into the cities and soon became out-and-out vandalism. By 1933, Halloween pranking had become so destructive that a lot of cities started considering banning the holiday altogether. Now, fortunately, a few cooler heads prevailed, which is why we're here, thank goodness. And some civic leaders started to suggest that buying the kids off might be way more successful. So some cities tried large-scale Halloween festivals, but logistically it became difficult to provide transportation and entertainment for tens of thousands of kids. Other cities created their own guides for homeowners on how to distract kids on Halloween. Now, these booklets center on parties, and costumes are one of the party activities that show up there. Now, there was already costuming that was happening on Halloween tied into parties. Companies like Dennison's had been offering Halloween party supplies since the 1910s, including home decorations and costumes that were sometimes made from crepe paper. There were other companies that had begun to manufacture Halloween party masks about the same time. But when we talk about costumes for kids in this sort of fetal stage of trick-or-treat, we're talking about pretty simple stuff, like a sheet thrown over the head to be a ghost, or maybe a long black leotard and a mask to be the devil. Now, there are a few early recorded uses of that phrase, trick-or-treat. The earliest comes from Canada in 1927, but it doesn't mention costuming at all. It's not until 1939 when we get the first description of trick-or-treating in a national magazine. An article in American Home called "A Victim of the Window Soaping Brigade" was the first time that a lot of Americans heard about this whole thing of kids dressing up in costumes and saying trick or treat, at which point they were rewarded with treats and they left that homeowner alone. That seemed like a pretty good deal to a lot of folks who were tired of reassembling their fences or fixing their broken windows, so it spread quickly. Before long, it was showing up on this new thing called television. In sitcoms like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and in Disney cartoons like 1952's Trick or Treat. Now, this all meant, of course, that retailing couldn't be far behind, and sure enough, there were plenty of companies willing to step in and help mom out when it came to both treats and costumes. After all, why spend all day making popcorn balls and caramel apples when, hey, the kids would rather have chocolate anyways? And who wanted to be garbed in old clothes pulled out of the attic when you could be your favorite superhero or a Disney character, a television personality? There were even companies making treat collectors, although of course the more entrepreneurial youngsters still prefer pillowcases. Other companies produced awesome noisemakers so that you could still annoy the heck out of your neighbors, even while not strictly pranking them. The next few decades were kind of what I think of as the golden age of trick-or-treat. The practice spread throughout the U.S., offering tots one night a year in which they could pretend to be something else. Go out for an adventure in a cool autumn night and get paid for it all in candy. I mean, seriously, what could be better? Well, of course, good things don't last forever, and by the 1970s there were a few adults who thought Halloween should belong to them. Counterculture groups like the burgeoning LGBTQ movement stepped in to take over existing events like the Greenwich Village Parade. Urban legends about poison candy and dangerous treats circulated, even though there was virtually no proof of anonymous psychos messing with your Halloween stuff. And then in 1978, a little movie called Halloween made the holiday way too scary for kids. But trick-or-treat was too beloved to go away for good. It settled in alongside more adult activities. And by the 2000s, it had morphed into these large-scale events where parents could take their little ones to be offered treats in safe environments like Boo at the Zoo. Of course, if your family happened to be of the Christian persuasion that didn't approve of Halloween, you could still get candy at the local church Harvest Festival. In 2020, something happened that a lot of people thought would drive another nail into Trick-or-Treat's coffin: pandemic. Ooh. But, you know, Halloween fans, come on, we're not going to let a little thing like plague get in the way of our trick-or-treat party. So a little out-of-the-box thinking yielded things like the candy chute, which could deliver treats. So something else was happening in the 21st century to trick-or-treat, something that would also ensure not just its continuation, but also its expanding popularity. It was being exported from America and was catching on around the world. So how did all of these other countries find out about this American tradition? Now, the answer might surprise you: via the global syndication of American television shows, especially sitcoms. I mean, when you're watching Roseanne or The Simpsons, it looks like a lot of fun, right? Aiding that worldwide discovery of Halloween via television was another American innovation: fast food. When McDonald's introduced their Halloween buckets in 1986, little did they know that they were helping to addict the entire Northern Hemisphere to Halloween. Now, it would surprise no one to know that trick-or-treat caught on in Japan first, where there was already a long tradition of cosplay, but who would have expected to see it in places like Russia, where it survived a government attempt to ban it in 2015 because it was quote-unquote harmful to children. Now, earlier you might have noticed that I referred to it catching on in the Northern Hemisphere, and there is a specific reason that Halloween's been a little slow to find much love south of the equator. The seasons are reversed, so it loses that fall flavor. But that hasn't stopped its rise recently in Australia, where trick-or-treat is growing in popularity along with yard haunts and even bigger semi-professional haunts. I mean, really, it's catching on with kids all over the world. I mean, who doesn't love seeing a cute type in a costume with a bright orange plastic jack-o'-lantern full of candy? But something else that came up. Remember those houses back in the 1930s that were and treats for the kids? Well, they were also putting together scary basements and trails of terror and school carnival haunted houses. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Ted and let him tell us about the other Halloween tradition.
Thanks, Lisa. Wow. Thank you. Every time I hear you talk about this stuff, I feel like I'm eating a massive Halloween brain sandwich. Thank you so much for that. As well as we just learned, people have celebrated Halloween in a lot of different ways throughout the years. And we're going to look at some of the fun, frightful ways people have celebrated Halloween throughout the years with things like haunted houses, haunted attractions, Halloween theme parks right here in Southern California. In fact, we're going to focus in on the first large-scale, hard-ticket Halloween-themed event at any theme park in the entire world, which is Knott's Scary Farm. Yeah! Debuted back in 1973. If you're unaware, no problem. It's okay. Knott's Berry Farm is billed as America's first theme park. Been around for a really long time. It's located in a town named Buena Park, California, not far from where we are here in Long Beach. And while they've been presenting this Halloween seasonal event for quite some time, right? For a long time, since 1973, like I mentioned before. And the event was originally hosted by a character named Sinister Seymour, portrayed by an actor named Larry Vincent. And well, Seymour was a very famous television horror host here in Southern California in the mid to late 60s, early 70s. And by the way, the event was originally titled Knott's Halloween Haunt. Then it changed to Knott's Scary Farm Halloween Haunt for many years, for decades, and now it's just Knott's Scary Farm. Before I forget though, just a little side note, for any of my former themed entertainment creative writing students, you know I dragged you through something named Haunt History 101. This is a fun little bonus credit for you, but for everybody else, hopefully you did this because as Knott's Scary Farm gained traction through the rest of the 1970s and the 80s and 90s, it wasn't long before other theme parks took notice and began hosting their own large-scale Halloween celebrations. It's very easy to trace every single one of them back to Knott's Scary Farm. But the interesting thing is this: the very first Knott's Halloween Haunt completely sold out before the event even began. It was as if Southern California was waiting for an event just like this. It was as if the country, the world, was waiting for an event just like this. Now, a lot of that is due to the wonderful marketing over at Knott's Berry Farm back in those days, but we're going to look at a handful of different factors right here in the Southern California region that helped Knott's Scary Farm achieve its early success, launching it into the stratosphere and altering Halloween-themed entertainment at theme parks forever. Now, one thing that helped Knott's Scary Farm achieve immediate success back in 1973, something that dates back many, many years before. Traces of the Madame Tussauds famous wax museum date back to the 1700s. And by the mid-1800s, a publication named Punch Magazine coined the term Chamber of Horrors to describe an exhibit at the London Wax Museum that depicted scenes of torture from the French Revolution. Very popular exhibit. And the Wax Museum quickly realized, oh my gosh, people have this strange fascination of seeing scenes of death recreated in wax. Well, in time, eventually other wax museums got into the business, making their way over here to the United States. By 1963, just one block north of Knott's Berry Farm, the Movieland Wax Museum opened. And by 1965, just 30 miles north of Knott's Berry Farm, the Hollywood Wax Museum opened, complete with a Chamber of Horrors. And so this is just a handful of years before Knott's Scary Farm debuted, and people were clearly enjoying being frightened in the dark at these wax museums. But in time, the Chamber of Horrors would recreate scenes from horror movies made famous by the Universal Studios monster movies. I mean, we're going back to the 30s with a lot of this stuff. I mean, and those movies were super popular. People were terrified of these movies. They'd never seen that type of horrific imagery up on the big screen before. So, of course, Universal Studios capitalized on that popularity. And in response to that growing demand of the Universal monsters and the B-horror movies that trailed, well, movie theaters began to find other ways to entertain their enthusiastic audiences. They knew these screaming teenagers needed something more. So going back to the 30s all the way into the 1960s, movie theaters across the country began to provide live, scary entertainment to thrill their audiences. And this drew huge crowds. Now, a lot of this would be tied to promotions and marketing gimmicks, and the live entertainment would include things like special raffles, contests, or magicians to help keep people entertained, sometimes in between horror movie double features and things like that. But sometimes live monsters entered the theater. So during a frightening moment, the lights would suddenly black out, and live monsters would invade the theater, accosting these poor, screaming guests. Pandemonium would break loose. Some of these people would run out of the theater in complete shock as to what they just witnessed. Now, a true master at taking that idea of live, scary entertainment at these movie theaters and tying that idea to marketing was film producer and director William Castle. Yeah, for one of his movies, he offered a $1,000 life insurance policy should anybody die of fright while watching his movie. For another one of his films, he had skeletons flying above everybody's heads inside the theater during a scary moment. And maybe one of his more famous gimmicks was installing buzzing seats into the theater that would trigger and go off during frightening moments in one of his movies named The Tingler. And so, yes, William Castle was a king, was a master, taking that idea of live, scary entertainment at movie theaters, tying that idea to marketing, and really kind of maximized that concept to rave reviews. Now, a lot of that stuff kind of disappeared by the mid to late 60s. But the teenage audiences who grew up with that stuff were at a perfect age in just a handful of years for a professional, large-scale, scary event in a controlled environment like a theme park. Now, speaking of figuring out different ways to frighten folks, that leads us to other companies who fully realize that people love to be scared, especially at places like haunted houses. These companies would begin to present walk-through attractions, which would entail frightening scenes with live actors dressed as monsters jumping out and scaring these customers. Well, in time, these companies and organizations would connect with various charities, and that is when we would see things really pick up. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, the JCs were originally known as the Young Men's Progressive Civic Association. By the 1920s, they were referred to as the Junior Chamber of Commerce. The JCs, young men helping out the community in a variety of ways. Well, the JCs have been involved with Halloween dating as far back as the 1930s. And by the 40s, we're hosting Halloween parades and carnivals. And by the 1960s, hosting Halloween events right here in Southern California. By the 1970s, the JCs were presenting their famous haunted houses to help raise money for charity, not just here in Southern California, but across the United States. The JCs helped establish the widespread popularity of haunted houses in this country during the 1970s, and really kind of helped establish a legacy that continues to this day. There's still some JC haunted houses in the country. Now, switching gears, completely unrelated company named Youth for Christ, based out of Wheaton, Illinois. It's a non-denominational ministry geared to getting youngsters involved with the church and the community. Well, a division of Youth for Christ is named Campus Life. Traces of the earliest Campus Life haunted house date back to at least 1968 in San Diego, California, just a couple hours south of Knott's Berry Farm. And they kind of used your standard haunted house gimmicks, but they really marketed this. Due to the success of the San Diego Campus Life Haunted House and others that followed, by 1971, there were nearly 100 Campus Life haunted houses draping our country. That's mind-blowing. The largest haunted house company right now in our country that I'm aware of is 13th Floor Entertainment Group. I do a lot of work with them. Yeah, they're awesome. And they have like 10, 15, 18 attractions, something like that. Campus Life had nearly 100. That's staggering. And these things were super popular. The Long Beach Campus Life Haunted House alone, the Campus Life Haunted House alone, drew over 23,000 guests in just a few nights back in the season of 1972, the year before Knott's Scary Farm debuted. Keep that in mind. It was no accident Knott's Scary Farm achieved immediate success. People love being scared. And so these Campus Life haunted houses, the JC haunted houses, other things like the March of Dimes, I mean, they helped kind of establish your standard haunted house repertoire of gimmicks, the polka dot room, the checkered room, the strobe room, those types of gimmicks that we've seen around the world at these different haunted houses. In fact, if you could see it, the photo on the upper left there is from the JC's haunted house in Ohio back in the 1970s, and the photo on the lower right is from Halloween Horror Nights in their classic monster maze here in Hollywood just a few years ago. So as we can see in those two photos, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so these haunted houses were draping the country in the 1970s, so of course it was only a matter of time before the theme parks got involved. But before we get to them, we need to look at things like the old-fashioned fun houses and things like the Tunnel of Love and how they helped pave the way to the types of attractions we see nowadays at these different Halloween events. I mean, there's whole books written on all that stuff, so I'm not going to get into all those details. But as far as the United States go, I mean, a lot of this dates back to at least the 1900s. Places like Coney Island. I mean, the Tunnel of Love was a romantic way for lovers to spend some time with each other in the dark. But in time, those ideas began to morph with things going on in the early fun houses and the dark rides. I mean, initially fun houses were meant to confuse you, get you lost. And those early scary dark rides were meant to thrill you with cheap, scary gags. But make no mistake about it, those dark rides, those fun houses, presented the early forms of linear walk-through attractions that we're familiar with nowadays at these various Halloween events. Now, for years, fun houses had your typical gimmicks of things like, you know, the slides, the ball pits, the spinning tunnels, a hall of mirrors, those types of things. But sometimes they would contain walkthroughs of blackened hallways with no light to use for navigation. Well, the operators realized that was a perfect opportunity to startle their guests. Well, by 1926, a lot of these ideas started to make their way out to places like Venice Beach here in Southern California, where there was a massive boardwalk amusement amusement park, basically, that drew over 14 million visitors a year. Now, modern traffic aside, Venice Beach is not that far from Knott's Berry Farm, and not far from where you're sitting right now was the Long Beach Pike that had a lot of these type of things. And we're not even getting into like the roaming carnivals that had early forms of fun houses and dark rides. But another company not far from Knott's Berry Farm is a company that really kind of specialized in dark rides. Well, in my opinion, they kind of perfected the idea, and it's our good friends over at Disneyland. And we know when Disneyland opened in 1955, they started right off the bat with some killer dark rides that revolutionized the themed entertainment industry because they were taking the concept of those old dark rides at piers and standard amusement parks, but Disney created stories out of them based on their cartoon classics like Snow White, Mr. Toad, Peter Pan, and then by the late 60s, well, the dark ride world was forever changed when Pirates of the Caribbean opened in March of 1967. There's whole books written on that, so I won't go into that whole history, but we know without any doubt that the dark ride world was revolutionized when Pirates of the Caribbean opened, and in just a couple of years, August 9th, 1969, the Haunted Mansion opened. Yeah. That's just a couple, small handful of years before Knott's Scary Farm debuted. There's whole documentaries on the Haunted Mansion and stuff, so I wanted to go into those weeds. But for today's discussion, it's important to know that with the opening of Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, the crowds swarmed to go on that ride. That attraction and its immediate success and popularity is a clear indication that the public love to be surrounded by ghosts and ghouls in the dark, especially at a theme park like Disneyland that raised the bar so high for these types of attractions in terms of story and production value. So we've looked at a small handful of attractions that surrounded Knott's Scary Farm to help with its early success. We'll look at just a couple more things before we kind of wrap things up, kind of help bring us up to where we are today. As I mentioned earlier, way back when, back in 1963, just one block north of Knott's Berry Farm, the Movieland Wax Museum opened. And you know, Movieland was a great partner for Knott's because out-of-town tourists could go spend the day at Knott's Berry Farm and spend the night at one of the nearby motels and then spend the following day over at Movieland. But in the summer of 1982, Movieland got into the horror business in a big-time way by opening up a permanent, all-year-round scare exhibit named the Black Box. Now, we've got one person who went, all right. Well, you know, this was Movieland's attempt to gather a younger, like teenage college student audience with the popularity of horror movies at the time making such a positive impact on the industry. The timing was perfect for an attraction just like this. Something that was permanent all year round and scary. Knott's Disneyland, they didn't have that. The exhibit was dedicated on June 9th, 1982, and opened with the attraction's narrator, film icon, Vincent Price. The 3,000 square foot exhibit cost over $1 million to produce and featured scenes from the movies 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween, Alien from 1979, and somewhat of a unique choice, a movie named Altered States from 1980. Now, these were fully recreated scenes in a very big budget way. This was not just plywood walls painted black. I mean, this was a very thorough presentation designed and created by theme park and film professionals. A very detailed sets, movie quality sets that really only a permanent installation could provide back in those days. Because we gotta remember, back then, Knott's Scary Farm was only operating like a few nights, and their attractions were, and still are, temporary installations. I always kind of dug the marketing for the Black Box. It told the story of the unfortunate case of a woman named Rosemarie Kabibi. She went through the Black Box, was never the same. She never spoke a word again, and her hair stayed standing up straight permanently. It sounded scary. I mean, I was way too young to even consider going through something like this, but the idea of something so frightening jammed into this box, because I actually thought like it was a physical black box people went into. It was not. But this set a very high standard in professional, scary, walk-through entertainment that we see nowadays, not just at events like Knott's Scary Farm, but especially at events like Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights with their movie quality sets within their attractions. So, going back to the 70s and the 80s and beyond, outside of traditional Halloween celebrations like trick-or-treating and costumes and candy, there were indeed dark rides, thrill rides, fun houses, haunted houses, wax museums, popular horror movies, pop culture, on and on and on. I mean, things like Disneyland's Haunted Mansion that all helped Knott's Scary Farm achieve its early success. And if we fast forward nearly 50 years later, well, we know what kind of positive impact that has had on the theme park industry, not just in the country, but globally. We see that idea spread throughout the theme parks around the world. And so it's kind of fun to think back that that idea of a large-scale Halloween celebration, a successful Halloween celebration, started way back when with our friends over at Knott's Scary Farm back in 1973. And as the Halloween and haunted attraction and theme park industries continue to grow, I think we're all lucky for it, because us fellow fans, because we can celebrate this stuff outside of October at events like here at Midsummer Scream. Not only are there presentations like the one you're sitting through right this second, I mean, that showroom floor is filled with amazing vendors that are celebrating the history of Halloween. And the Hall of Shadows, that celebrates the idea of Halloween parties and home decorations turned into home haunts. And so as we look back at the tiny overview of Halloween festivities and frightful entertainment that we've shared today, well, maybe sometime during the show we can remember to take just a brief moment to kind of slow down, stop, and just take a second to appreciate the wonderful Midsummer Scream offerings that all reflect on the massive legacy that has brought Halloween to where it is today. If you have any questions or comments, we do have a little bit of time for questions, but otherwise, if you see us around the show, you can make sure you introduce yourself and say hi. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Right there, Vince. Hi.
Hey, are you going to come out on this?
Nothing planned right now, but good question. Right there.
I was 9 years old, went to the black box.
Wow.
So my grandma took me to see this thing. Movie Land, well, first of all, Movie Land back me, I wish that thing was still there. It's insanely good. But yeah, the black box. I was terrified. And I didn't taste much of it. I did see it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and you survived the black box. I think it scared a lot of people. I know it had a big impact on folks that are behind Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights. So that's awesome that you're able to do that. Yes, right over here.
Where does the orange and black color thing come from?
Orange and black.
Weirdly enough, the original, if you look at like 100 years ago, the colors given for Halloween in a lot of decorating guides were yellow and brown. Orange and black doesn't really come into it until about the 1920s, and I think it probably is a combination of the popularity of the jack-o'-lantern being orange and black being night and bats and cats and so forth. And then black really also gets cemented. This is another weird fact having to do with color. Witches related to Halloween were usually shown in red until 1939, when a little movie called The Wizard of Oz came out and forever recreated the popular image of the witch, and at that point black becomes really important.
Any other questions? Over there, right here. Yes.
So, question actually, since we're talking about haunts and all these haunted attractions, what is your personal favorite?
My personal favorite? Oh, you're asking the dude who wrote the book on the history of Knott's Scary Farm. So, yeah, I love them all, but I love Knott's Scary Farm. Awesome, thank you. Yes, way back in there, over there in the back.
How about the term All Hallows Eve? That's part of the Irish heritage. I was wondering if that doesn't have anything to do with Halloween. Is that just a myth?
I'm sorry, and
The term All Hallows Eve
Oh,
could have
All
All
Hallows
Hallows Eve and Saints Day.
All Hallows Eve is, hollow was actually an old word for saints. And Halloween comes from the fact that the holidays in Celtic tradition started on the eve before. So Samhain actually celebrated, say, on the 31st. It would start at sundown and then go on to the next day. So when the Catholic Church comes in and co-ops all of these existing things, they stick by that model. So they would start celebrating All Saints' Day, which was November 1st, at sundown on the 31st, and All Hallows Evening, which meant All Saints' Evening, the eve before November 1st. And eventually the Scottish are kind of the ones who take that and transmute it to Halloween. And for many years it was spelled with that apostrophe between the two E's, because that broke up evening, Halloween. And it wasn't actually, weirdly enough, until about the 1940s that it started to be spelled without the apostrophe. So there's another weird bit of trivia.
And there's no correlation between the like spiritual like connotations of that day in Halloween, right?
That is a question that scholars are debating like crazy. There's a huge debate in Halloween scholarship about how much the holiday owes its history to Samhain and how much it owes to All Saints' Day. I truthfully don't see a lot of it coming from All Saints' Day, which by the way was moved from its original date of May 13th to November 1st. I think that was probably to co-opt Samhain, to assist the church in co-opting Samhain. They moved it to that date. All Saints' Day is not inherently spooky. All Souls' Day, which was added in, I think, the mid-11th century, actually is a little bit spookier. And some of the holiday may have come from that, but to me, I see the macabre side of it all in Samhain.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for one or two more. Anybody? Back there, yes.
Sorry, I'm doing a twofer, but have you ever seen any footage of an actual spook show that they used to do in movie theaters? It's supposed to be like really rare, but I thought maybe you might have seen something.
I haven't seen like videos of it. I mean, there's certainly a lot of photo references of them.
I've seen some.
Yeah,
Weirdly enough, there's an absolutely god-awful movie called Monsters Crash the Pajama Party, which was issued by a wonderful video company called Something Weird. And I don't know if Something Weird is even still around anymore, but they put out a DVD of Monsters Crash the Pajama Party that actually had some spook show footage appended. I mean, it's not in the movie, but on that DVD there was some.
very cool. I have that DVD, so I'm gonna have to look it up.
It looks amazing, all the stuff you see from it, and it's like, why couldn't this?
It's
What do you see the future for Halloween moving forward?
I get asked this a lot. I think it is extraordinarily healthy, despite the number of times people want to decry its fading or whatever. The expansion around the globe has been extraordinary. When I started researching Halloween history about 2000, there was nothing outside of America and the English-speaking countries. Just in the last 20 years, the way it has taken off around the world is incredible. There's really, I haven't seen another cultural explosion like that. So in terms of how it's going to go in this country, a long time ago I predicted that Halloween would merge more and more with Dia de los Muertos. And I have seen that come about a little bit, maybe not quite to the extent I thought we might see, but it's an odd holiday because it morphs so much. I actually at one point crafted like a little cycle of about every 40 years. I am not sure really where it's going to go next. It's going to be really interesting to see though.
yeah, and we know with the theme parks and all these different attractions that are all over the place. I mean, they're going strong. Of course, everybody was naturally freaked out, with 2020 and stuff, and getting back into the groove in 2021. But I think things are going really good, and for the theme park world, haunted attraction world. So I think it's just more days, more days. Starting in early September, going into mid to late November and on. They're gonna keep going. I think pretty big with all of this stuff. All right, we got time for one more. Anybody? Okay, well,
I'll ask one actually.
go for it.
Dia de los Muertos, how does that come into, and does it cross over? It's more of a Catholic tradition? Is it
Dia de los Muertos to me is what happens when you pull the Irish component out of All Saints Day. When the Hernan Cortez came over and conquered the indigenous peoples in Mexico, and then we get the Catholic Church coming in. They are again co-opting existing traditions, except this time instead of Celtic, they're co-opting Mayan and Aztec and the indigenous peoples of America. And we get the same holiday but different out of that. It's really interesting that you see a lot of the same sort of interesting, slightly macabre element, but it's in the traditional Dia de los Muertos, it's more about mocking death. It's about honoring your deceased spirits and the spirits of your loved ones and making fun of death rather than sort of making it scary. It's only kind of as it's drawn more on Halloween that it's become a little bit more scary.
Okay, everybody. Well, if you think of any questions or comments or anything, and you see us run the show, come introduce yourself and say hello. We do want to thank Midsummer Screen for having us, and so on behalf of the amazingly talented Lisa Morton, I'm Ted Dougherty. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great show. Thank you.
At this time, please gather your belongings and exit the theater so we may